Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Erick. Today, I'll be diving into one of the biggest and most complex conversations in modern ufology, UAP disclosure. Since the groundbreaking 2017 New York Times article that exposed the Pentagon's secret UFO program, a wave of new voices has entered the discussion. Some of them are insiders, some of them are investigators, and some of them have been telling us the same things for decades, only to be ignored until now. But here's the big question. How much of what we've been told is actually credible? Who among these voices have delivered consistent, verifiable information, and who might be muddying the waters intentionally or not? Today we're going to compare and contrast key figures in UAP disclosure, including Luis Elizondo, Jeremy Corbell, Bob Lazar, Commander Fravor, David Grush, Dr. Gary Lee Nolan, Chris Bledsoe, Jake Barber, and Dr. Stephen Greer. Some of the government whistleblowers who have testified before Congress will break down their claims, look at where they align, where they contradict, and most importantly, where we need to apply critical thinking. At the end, I'll give you my take on who I believe has been the most credible base on what's come out to this point that has seemingly come to fruition. So if you're ready, let's get into it. All right, let's start off with the players and their claims. Luis Elizondo. I'm going to call him the insider outsider. Luis Elizondo is arguably the most recognizable face in modern UAP disclosure. As the former director of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, otherwise known as AATIP, he claimed that the U.S. government had been actively studying UAPs for years, and that many of these craft displayed capabilities beyond human technology, and was partly responsible for drafting the 5 observables used to qualify an event for further review. His biggest contribution? He brought forward 3 of the famous videos: the gimbal, the go fast, the FLIR, which the Pentagon later confirmed as authentic. Now, before I get into the controversial stuff with him, it strikes me as odd that this gentleman left a storied career in the government in order to be able to help push disclosure to the public. And his first step, he jumps out of the government and joins forces to the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. What a weird match. Blink-182 guitarist, and it just that whole thing never made any sense to me. And the people that DeLonge had around him with Mellon and some of the others, it was a strange bedfellows. But that didn't last long, because Mellon and Elizondo and one other gentleman, I forget his name now, they pretty quietly just exited stage left from To the Stars Academy. It's strange to me. But here's the controversy with Elizondo. He says he resigned because the government wasn't taking the UAP issue seriously. But he was part of a program that was investigating UAP. So I think that it's more an issue that they weren't taking disclosure seriously rather than the topic itself. He was literally an insider with complete and total access to all this information, yet he made the choice to leave the program because that was the only way that he could disseminate information to the public view. It seems kind of like a backward way of doing that. The Pentagon, since then, has pushed back, claiming he had no official role in AATIP, though multiple sources have confirmed his involvement. He has said consistently and stated that some UAPs appear to be non-human in origin, but refuses to speculate beyond that. He almost always says some UAPs. He's shown himself to be a master at leaving breadcrumbs of truth in a very cryptic and very vague manner. By this, I mean statements where he indicates having had a conversation with a high-up military official who simply left him with the statement of, "Have you read your Bible lately?" When he drops things like that, they're obviously intentional. They're obviously intended to get those who are paying attention to pay attention to what he's saying without him having to say anything. Elizondo's credibility, from what I can tell, and from what I've gleaned from other sources, mostly solid. He hasn't made any wild claims, tends to stick with what he can, let's say, prove. Keep in mind, though, that Elizondo has always maintained this phenomenon is viewed as a viable threat to national security. And not only are some of the craft branded as being off-world, they also came with biologics in their recovery. Then you have Jeremy Corbell. I'm going to call this guy the hype man, because that's exactly what he is. Not to take anything away from him or his contribution. Corbell is more of a journalist and a filmmaker than an insider, but he is one of the loudest voices in disclosure. He brought us the Bob Lazar documentary not too many years ago, and has been responsible for releasing leaked videos of UAPs, including the infamous pyramid-shaped UFOs filmed by the Navy. He also seems to enjoy taking credit for the jellyfish video. I do have to say that I've enjoyed some of Corbell's documentaries, and I find myself watching Weaponized, the podcast he does with George Knapp. He's a likable guy, albeit he does seem consumed with his coolness factor. His strength, he has access to military sources. By his own admission, considers himself to be someone that people seek out to tell things that they shouldn't be telling to him. He and his compatriot George Knapp consistently reference all of this mind-blowing proof that they can't show us because they have to protect their sources. He credits himself repeatedly for getting new footage out to the public quickly, but yet when you watch him in conversations in podcasts that he does, he often refers to the lengthy period of time that it takes him to release a piece of film footage, because he spends anywhere from a year to 2 years trying to vet the person who's provided the video. Are they who they say they are? Do they work for who they say they work for? Things like that. His weaknesses, he tends to lean on the sensational and often presents unverified materials as fact. And whether intentional or not, it could be said that he fancies himself a handler for the likes of personalities like Bob Lazar and David Grush. And then most recently, taking ownership of the Immaculate Constellation report that was submitted into the congressional hearing. I don't know where I fall on this guy. I think his heart's in the right place. I think he's pretty damn good at what he does. But he seems to be the type of person who inserts himself into the center of things that maybe he's not the center of. We'll just say that. And we have Bob Lazar. This guy, you have to mention him. He's the OG whistleblower, right? Bob Lazar has been claiming since the 1980s that he worked at S4 near Area 51, reverse engineering alien craft powered by Element 115. That at the time when that came out, Element 115 was not proven to be a real element. Since then, yes, it does exist, but it exists in our reality anyway in a very unstable form. Bob's stories always seem to include an overreaching idea that there is an incredible degree of compartmentalization within our government and military concerning these crafts. His story again indicates the fact that non-human craft have not only been retrieved and reverse engineered, but that he briefly states having passed a room with a window that appeared to have non-human biologics in it. But then here's where things get tricky. His academic credentials seemingly can't be verified on a consistent basis. They say he has been here. They say he hasn't been here. They say he went to school here. They say he didn't go to school here. Some of his claims, like the existence of Element 115, the unusual hand scanning technology that he would gain access to the departments in S4, even a printed directory showing him as an employee of S4 have gained some credibility over time. He's been consistent as hell with his story for decades. He doesn't change a thing. Sometimes there's a little bit more that comes out. Sometimes there's a little less that's said, but it's always consistent with his prior recountings. Does that make him credible? That's hard to say. Some view him as a prophet of modern disclosure, while others think he's a storyteller who basically just got lucky. The interweaving thread here is the relation that all these people have to common names within this, just as in Bob Lazar's case. George Knapp brought his story to light. Then you have Commander David Fravor, the pilot who saw the Tic Tac firsthand. Fravor's 2004 Tic Tac UFO encounter is one of the most compelling firsthand pilot accounts of UAP. Unlike many others in disclosure, he has no financial incentive. He's just a military guy telling us what he saw. Verdict? I think he's highly credible. There never seems to be any exaggeration. There doesn't seem to be any kind of an agenda behind his testimony. Just an experienced pilot reporting an event, and that's it. Having seen Commander Fravor in both long and short form interviews, his story does not change one bit. The one thing that does stand out to me as odd and possibly concerning is that he emphatically states time and time again that at no time was he ever pressured or warned not to speak of this event publicly. And that gives me pause because it goes against what we've all been told for decades about not only military but mainstream pilots having had experiences. That part of it doesn't set well with me. I was literally shocked the first time I heard him asked about that. May have been on the Joe Rogan Experience. And he was like, no, nobody ever told me I couldn't talk about it. Which seems weird, doesn't it? Then we have David Grush, the whistleblower with big claims. Grush's testimony before Congress in 2023 was huge. He claimed the U.S. had recovered non-human craft, not only craft, but non-human biologics as well. Additional bombshells were the use of term ultra or interdimensional, as well as his assertion that the United States has been recovering these craft since the 1930s at the behest of all places, the Vatican. Now, before I go any further, I have to say that the latest Luis Elizondo interview on the Sean Ryan Show, he also confirms knowledge that AATIP was in possession of detailed information stating that Grush's claim of the Vatican's involvement was true. On top of more. The Vatican has more information. Interesting. It's a good interview. I'll have to say that interview that Elizondo did with Sean Ryan here very recently, within the last couple of days, I think it aired, did kind of change my perspective on Elizondo. I'm not going to tell you where I sat to begin with, but there were periods of that conversation, that interview, where I think Lou let out a little bit more of his real self, and that struck me as being endearing. So I'll just say that it's a good interview. It's worth a watch. Grush continued to go on to say that there's an ongoing secret retrieval and reverse engineering program that are outside the government's oversight, and that they are being funded by black money, and that the entities engaging in these recoveries make no bones about illegally keeping this information hidden from Congress. But, and this is a big but, Grush has offered no physical evidence. He says he knows where the evidence is, but hasn't produced it. His overuse of the claims that he could and would provide more detailed information while only in a skiff, if he were granted that opportunity. Has that happened? Some say yes, while others, like Congressman Tim Burchett, only kind of smile and nod when they're asked if the additional testimonies ever happened. So again, we don't know. On Grush's credibility, maybe. So far, it seems that he is who he says he is, and that he's held the positions that he says he's held. But without proof, it remains a claim, right? This guy is kind of, in my opinion, come out of nowhere with a flurry of bombshell accusations. But since then, where has he gone? Where has he gone? I mean, I saw Jeremy Corbell, whip out his iPhone and dial Grush up just shortly before the Immaculate Constellation debacle. So he's around, but where has he gone? And what is he doing now? I mean, it was like, boom, flash in the pan, and then nothing. Then you have Dr. Gary Nolan. He's a scientist who's essentially looking for answers. Dr. Gary Nolan is a Stanford professor who has analyzed anomalous materials and currently claims that exposure to UAPs has caused significant brain injuries in some individuals. His claims of possessing anomalous materials seems to be backed up by even the likes of Diana Pasulka. She revealed that Nolan accompanied her and another unnamed individual to the site of a crash retrieval and left there with materials in hand. Diana even details the extent of the difficulties that they went through with him getting through security at the airport, having had those materials with him. It's interesting to note that Pasulka also heavily leans towards the Vatican's knowledge and vast collection of historical documentation of this phenomenon. It seems like that is a reoccurring thread, no matter what your stance is on this phenomenon. Nolan's credibility, in my opinion, he is very high. He's a respected scientist, but does occasionally make bold claims that he can't fully substantiate. But to me, he seems to have been drawn into this conversation maybe unwittingly, almost as if he's an unknowing pawn in all of this. I think his intentions are good. I think his heart's in the right place. But I think there may be people pulling the strings to his involvement. Then you have Chris Bledsoe, the experiencer. Chris Bledsoe's claims are more on the paranormal side of UAP experiences. He ties UFO encounters to religious and supernatural phenomena. His story is powerful, yet very positive. It seems very contradictory to the prevalent national security threat theory by many of those I mentioned earlier. I do believe that he believes what he's saying, but I have to ask, is his truth biased by his admitted faith in Christian beliefs? And should that even have any bearing on his testimony at all? I don't know. He makes many claims that several alphabet agencies, including NASA, continue to use his knowledge and experience to further their research. Personally, I've tried. I can't find any hard evidence that those claims are fact. But again, there's nothing to really refute them either. I do find it's interesting that yet again his experience points heavily to spirituality being a significant component of this topic. It is something that seems to be coming up a lot in recent years, and an underlying thread, as I said, with some of these other disclosure figures. His credibility, I guess, depends on how much weight you give to an experiencer's testimony. I think it's important to note that Mr. Bledsoe faced significant financial hardship and health concerns earlier in his life. And that seems to be an important part of his story, which he has written about in his book, which is for sale. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. Then you have Jake Barber. I call this guy the wild card. Jake Barber is a former U.S. Air Force veteran who has made some bold claims recently about secret technologies. But he's more of a recent figure in the conversation. His credibility is still being assessed. He claims to have been a pilot for a secret government retrieval team, having been tasked with recovery of multiple non-human craft. In his recent coming out party on News Nation, I was honestly touched by his emotional response to being in close proximity to one of the craft. Again, contrary to the fear-mongering precedent set by other individuals on the military side of this phenomenon would have you believe. He's now the head of his own retrieval team, who relies heavily on the use of psionic assets to not only summon, but ultimately in some way aid in the or overtake the piloting of these craft, leading to recovery. His team essentially works within the public sector now and apparently has no ties to any government agency. I suppose the thought there is that anything recovered would immediately be brought to the public view? Maybe. I find it interesting that in his full-length interview on News Nation, the bombshell video of the egg-shaped non-human craft that was used in the segment has been proven that it was not actually the video from the event that Barber claims to have been a part of. But it was similar. Should that in itself be concerning? On a personal note, I've watched his appearances in several interviews and video segments. I have to say that there is something about the way he presents himself that is quite off-putting to me. At times he seems nervous, at other times mildly aggressive in his responses. Yet he's always very polished. His 10 years of involvement in these programs on the surface anyway seem to check out. But with as new as he is to the topic within the public view, I think it's way too early to assign any credibility to his claims. Then we have Dr. Stephen Greer, the controversial activist. Stephen Greer has been a major figure in disclosure since the 1990s. He founded the Disclosure Project and has brought forward hundreds of witnesses who claim knowledge of UAP programs. On a personal note, Early on with his first couple of documentaries, I could not wait to see his next effort. I could not get enough of his information. But after those first two, there seemed to be a significant change in his, not so much in his message, but in the delivery of it. And that's what makes things get kind of murky for me. He claims the U.S. government has had anti-gravitic technology for decades, but provides no real proof. It's all because I say so, because I know, because they know I know. He maintains the government is in possession of technology that would allow for zero-point energy to change the world, yet that they don't want that to come out. He insists that UAPs are always peaceful and that the threat narrative is manufactured. He goes on to say that reverse-engineered technologies are being placed in man-made replicas of these craft and will be used in a false flag alien invasion to usher in a one-world government. He's made bold claims about consciousness-based contact, the CE5 protocols, which involve contacting UAPs and their occupants through meditation, which is essentially the same thing the psionics are doing with Barber's team. So there's underlying threads of continuity between all these people. But the CE5 protocol that Greer has brought to light, that he promotes heavily, it's a significant income for Dr. Greer. He charges handsomely to attend his CE5 protocol events. Greer does seem to scoff the credibility of any whistleblowers or parts of their testimonies if they haven't come from within his community. And I find that concerning. So where do they all agree? Where do they all clash? So in the agreements, there's a UAP presence that defies conventional explanation. The government has more information than it's letting on. Some UAPs show technological capabilities beyond our own known science. They can all come to terms with those. The disagreements are UAPs extraterrestrial, interdimensional, man-made, or originating from a spiritual or a divine provenance? Does the U.S. actually recover craft? Or is this all speculation? Is the government suppressing disclosure, or is it just slow to process the phenomenon? Is it possible the government is using this technology to create a false narrative? Could the elements of the U.S. government remain completely in the dark about this topic until these congressional hearings, as they would lead us to believe? Why doesn't this conversation within the United States ever reflect the fact that these experiences are happening all over the world? So much of it seems to revolve around just U.S. players and agencies. Why is this not a worldwide discussion? Is it perhaps that other nations throughout the globe have shown to be largely more transparent about this phenomenon with their culture, where we are not? And then that brings me into the Immaculate Constellation, which Jeremy Corbell had a significant hissy fit that he was not recognized or related into the congressional record as being the person that produced this document to them. Now, I think it's really interesting. I've read the report, and there's a lot of stuff in there. But I decided to ask ChatGTP to analyze the 12 pages of the Immaculate Constellation document. I used the reasoning prompt and asked it to summarize the documents. What I'm about to read you is the result of that query. This is from ChatGTP. The Immaculate Constellation documents are important because they suggest that the UAP disclosure process isn't happening randomly. Instead, it appears to be a deliberately orchestrated, phased release of information. Here are the key points. Controlled timing. The documents imply that the information is being released in stages rather than all at once, which could help manage public reaction and gradually shift perceptions about UAPs. Compartmentalization. They propose that different insiders and agencies hold separate pieces of the puzzle. This means no single individual or source can reveal the full picture, contributing to the inconsistencies we often see. The blending of fact and fiction. The theory argues that the real verifiable data is mixed with unverified or misleading information. This blending makes it hard to discern the truth, suggesting that some discrepancies in this public claim may be intentional. Technology rollout. Considerations. One implication is that if advanced, possibly non-human technology has been recovered, its gradual disclosure might be planned to allow society to adjust without causing widespread panic or disruption. In essence, the Immaculate Constellation documents challenge us to think critically about the timing and the content of UAP disclosures, urging a deeper look at why certain pieces of evidence or testimony are released when they are, and what that might mean for our understanding of these phenomena. I thought that was very interesting because when you read the document yourself, there is a lot of technical jargon in there. There is a lot of initialized shortenings of departments. There is a lot of categorization of types of shapes and colors and appearances of these things. And when asked to go through it, that's what it came up with. So does this explain why Elizondo and Grush and Fravor and all these people who have come out as whistleblowers seem to be kind of coming in waves? Could it be an intentional rollout rather than an organic one? If so, and it seems to be, who's controlling it? So my final take on who is the most credible. If I had to pick the most reliable sources based on what has come to fruition, my top three would be, and believe me when I tell you, I had lists upon cross-referencing, checklists and pros and cons, and these are my top three who I think is worth paying attention to. And I'll even give you a fourth as a honorable mention. First was no surprise to me at all. Could have probably picked this without any effort whatsoever. Commander David Fravor. No agenda, no hype, just a military pilot at the highest rank of ability and position. Recounting a confirmed UAP encounter that was recorded on multiple sensor interfaces. He was no surprise to me at all. I knew it was going to be him before I even started. But in all honesty, I surprised myself with this next pick. I truly was not expecting my list to include this gentleman. Not even in the top three. But at the end of the day, once all the check marks were in all the corresponding categories, I can't really argue with my results. So coming in at number 2 is Luis Elizondo. He really hasn't been caught in any outright falsehoods. He presents a measured approach to disclosure. He's an expert, as I said, in leaving breadcrumb trails. Do I trust him? Not necessarily. But do I believe the things that he says are accurate? I think I have to go with yes. Coming in at number 3, may seem like an odd choice, Dr. Gary Nolan. He's a scientist with real data. Some of his claims obviously require further scrutiny. But again, I think this guy is maybe in a way harmless in the big picture of whoever's controlling this. His information is interesting. I think a lot of what he says is provable, but doesn't necessarily make waves, doesn't really affect the conversation significantly one way or another, if that makes sense to you. I do have to tell you, in honorable mention on this list, and I wasn't planning on doing this until I got to the end of it, Chris Bledsoe comes in at honorable mention. My reasoning behind that is that when you boil down the term disclosure, to me that means verifiable proof and admission that this phenomenon exists. In that aspect, the 3 I just listed above, I believe, are working towards that disclosure. When you bring in testimonies like Bledsoe's, now you're attempting to show discovery of the origin of these things. To me, those are 2 completely different animals. I do hope that Bledsoe's take on it is the truth. I do hope that. Now, that doesn't mean that the others are wrong, but it does mean we should be cautious about taking every claim at face value. And I think it warrants to repeat something that I have stated in so many of my episodes. Just how important critical thinking is on your own, outside of what you're being told. So what do you think? Who do you trust in the world of UAP disclosure? Let me know your thoughts. Comment on the video. Message me on Instagram, Uncomfortable Podcast 65. Let me know. And as always, stay uncomfortable, my friends.